1839. The jungles of Copán, Honduras. Hacking away a final thick vine, American explorer John Lloyd Stephens stared into the stone face of a lost king. For centuries, the official histories written by Spanish conquerors insisted the Americas held no great ancient civilizations. The jungle-choked ruins were dismissed as the work of a forgotten lesser people. Stephens's discovery was the first step in a century-long journey of how Spanish scholars never expected American archaeologists to unearth Maya cities rivaling Egypt's power, a revelation that would rewrite the story of the Americas. A forgotten kingdom. When the first Spanish ships sliced through the turquoise waters of the Caribbean in the early 1500s, they weren't just looking for gold. They were looking for a world that fit their own rigid worldview, a worldview forged in the crucible of the 700-year Reconquista, the campaign to reclaim the Iberian Peninsula from Moorish rule. This long struggle had instilled in the Spanish a fervent, almost militant, sense of cultural and religious superiority. They arrived in the Americas with steel, horses, and a profound belief in their divine mandate to conquer and convert. And the complex, thriving civilization of the Yucatan Peninsula simply didn't fit. What the conquistadors found was not a wilderness of primitive peoples. They encountered a network of city-states with bustling markets, organized governments, and a deeply spiritual culture. They saw causeways of white limestone, called Sakbiop, connecting urban centers. They saw towering pyramids that pierced the jungle canopy, serving as both temples and celestial observatories. In his letters, Hernán Cortés himself marveled at the scale and order of the cities he witnessed. Yet in the same breath, he and his contemporaries described the inhabitants as barbaric and their beliefs as demonic. In their eyes, the local populations were savages, seemingly incapable of such grand engineering. This inherent contradiction, praising the architecture while denigrating the architects, was the seed of a historical lie that would grow for 400 years. The skepticism in their reports was palpable, and it found fertile ground back in Europe. The Spanish crown, steeped in the cultural arrogance of the European Renaissance, readily accepted that these magnificent structures must have been built by someone else. The theories that blossomed in the minds of court scholars were as wild as the jungle itself. Perhaps a lost tribe of Israel, wandering the desert for 40 years, had somehow crossed the Atlantic and fulfilled a forgotten prophecy. Maybe it was the Egyptians, whose own pyramids bore a superficial resemblance. Others looked to the Phoenicians, the great sailors of antiquity, or even to the mythical civilization of Atlantis. The one theory that was never seriously considered by the Spanish scholars was the simplest and most obvious one: that the ancestors of the Maya people they were actively subjugating had built these cities themselves. To admit this would be to admit that these savages possessed a history, a culture, and an intellect that could rival Europe's own, a notion that was simply unthinkable. This cultural blind spot had devastating, tangible consequences. On the heels of the soldiers came the priests, determined to stamp out native beliefs and replace them with the cross. This campaign of cultural destruction reached its fiery apex under the command of one man, Bishop Diego de Landa. Landa was a complex figure. He was both a brutal enforcer of orthodoxy and a meticulous, if biased, ethnographer. In 1562, convinced the Maya texts were instruments of the devil, he orchestrated a great auto da fe at the town of Mani. He ordered the collection and burning of every Maya book, or codex, that could be found. These were beautiful, screen-folded texts made from fig bark, containing centuries of accumulated knowledge on history, astronomy, mathematics, and religion. With the flames that rose into the humid Yucatan night, the Maya's own story, written in their unique hieroglyphic script, was turned to ash. Only 4 of these precious documents are known to have survived the purge. What the Spanish couldn't understand, they erased. For the next 3 centuries, the great Maya cities were slowly, inexorably swallowed by the jungle. The stone plazas where kings once held court became home to jaguars and tapirs. The pyramids where priests charted the course of Venus became draped in thick, suffocating vines. The Spanish established their own colonial towns, often quarrying the ancient temples for pre-cut stone to build their churches and haciendas. The Maya people themselves were pushed to the margins of this new society, their history severed, their ancestors' achievements dismissed as the work of phantoms. By the 19th century, the accepted European wisdom was that the Americas had never produced a classical civilization on par with Greece, Rome, or Egypt. The ruins were curiosities, the stuff of local legend, but nothing more. But a few lone voices began to question the narrative. The story of what happened next begins not with a scholar in a dusty library, but with an American diplomat, an adventurer with a flair for the dramatic and an insatiable curiosity. In 1839, John Lloyd Stephens, accompanied by the brilliant and courageous English artist Frederick Catherwood, journeyed deep into the wilds of Central America, a region then racked by civil war. Their travels were perilous. They faced disease, bandits, and impassable terrain. But what they documented in their best-selling 2-volume book, Incidents of Travel in Central America, Chiapas, and Yucatan, was a game-changer. Catherwood's stunningly accurate and evocative drawings, made with the help of a camera lucida, brought the ruins of cities like Copán and Palenque to life for a Western audience for the very first time. More importantly, Stephens, looking upon the grandeur of the ruins, made a bold, almost heretical statement for his time. The objects of our enterprise were not the works of people who have passed away, but of the same races who inhabited the country at the time of the Spanish conquest, or of some not very distant progenitors. He argued that these cities were built by the ancestors of the very people still living in the region. The impossible was about to become undeniable. Stephens and Catherwood had cracked open the door, but it would take the vast resources of major American institutions and a new generation of intrepid archaeologists armed with scientific methods to kick that door off its hinges. They were about to find something that not even Stephens, in his wildest dreams, could have predicted. They were about to find an empire that rivaled Egypt, the archaeologists' double life. The dawn of the 20th century saw a seismic shift in archaeology. The romantic adventures of men like Stephens were giving way to systematic scientific inquiry. This new era was bankrolled by the vast industrial fortunes of American tycoons like Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller, men who believed in a kind of gospel of wealth and saw funding science and education as a way to advance American prestige on the world stage. Institutions like Harvard's Peabody Museum and the newly formed Carnegie Institution of Washington turned their gaze southward, hungry for knowledge that could rewrite history. The story of how American archaeology truly unlocked the secrets of the Maya is inseparable from the story of one of its most dynamic and controversial figures, Sylvanus Griswold Morley. He was a brilliant scholar, a relentless promoter, a showman, and, when his country needed him, a dedicated spy. Morley, a Harvard-trained archaeologist, was utterly obsessed with Maya hieroglyphs. From a young age, he possessed a brilliant mind for codes and patterns, a skill that would serve him in more ways than one. In 1914, with a mix of academic rigor and sheer force of personality, he convinced the Carnegie Institution to fund a massive, multi-decade project to excavate and study the sprawling ruins of Chichen Itza in the Yucatan Peninsula. It was the largest and most ambitious archaeological undertaking the Americas had ever seen. To Morley, Chichen Itza was the Rosetta Stone of the Maya world, a cosmopolitan capital where different cultures had mingled, and a place that held the key to understanding their entire civilization. What Morley and his team of international experts uncovered over the next 20 years was staggering, fundamentally altering the perception of ancient American life. Chichen Itza was not just a collection of temples. It was a carefully planned metropolis, covering over 6 square miles, home to tens of thousands of people. At its heart stood the Great Pyramid, known as El Castillo, the Temple of Kukulkan. Morley's team meticulously documented its incredible astronomical alignment. The pyramid functions as a massive solar calendar encoded in stone, with a total of 365 steps, one for each day of the year. The true spectacle, in which they were the first to scientifically document, occurs twice a year. On the spring and fall equinoxes, the late afternoon sun casts a series of triangular shadows along the pyramid's northern staircase, creating the illusion of a massive, feathered serpent slithering down from the heavens to the earth. It was a feat of engineering and mathematics that no one in Europe believed possible for a New World culture. The discoveries just kept coming, each one adding a new layer of complexity to the Maya world. They unearthed the Great Ball Court, a colossal stadium 554 feet long, where a ritualistic and often deadly game was played. The acoustics were so perfect that a whisper from one end could be heard clearly at the other. They excavated the Temple of the Warriors, a breathtaking structure fronted by a forest of 200 stone columns, each carved with the likeness of a Toltec warrior, evidence of a powerful connection to the cultures of central Mexico. Deep within this temple, they made a thrilling discovery: an older, buried temple containing a brightly painted Chacmool altar, a reclining figure believed to have been used in sacred ceremonies involving human hearts. But perhaps the most tantalizing feature was the sacred cenote, a massive, forbidding natural well nearly 200 feet across. Local legends told of it being a gateway to the underworld, a place where offerings, including young men and women, were given to the rain god Chac. Before Morley's official project began, an American diplomat named Edward Herbert Thompson had purchased the land and, using a dredge he designed himself, had pulled up a treasure trove of artifacts from the cenote's murky depths: gold discs, jade plaques, copper bells, and human remains, confirming the chilling tales. This added to the growing sense that the Maya were not the peaceful stargazers of popular imagination, but a society steeped in complex and often brutal ritual. Morley's work was a media sensation, featured in magazines and newsreels. But what the public didn't know was that his archaeological work served as the perfect cover for a second clandestine career. When the United States entered World War I, Morley's deep knowledge of the Central American coastline, his fluency in Spanish, and his network of local contacts made him an invaluable asset. He was recruited by the Office of Naval Intelligence. While ostensibly mapping remote ruins and deciphering ancient glyphs, Agent 53 was actually establishing a network of counterintelligence agents, tracking German U-boat activity, and monitoring for potential spy networks that might threaten the Panama Canal. He was, quite literally, a real-life Indiana Jones, hacking through the jungle by day and sending coded messages back to Washington by night. What neither Morley nor his superiors knew at the time was that his greatest contribution wouldn't be in espionage, but in cracking a far older code. His early work, detailed in his 1915 book, An Introduction to the Study of the Maya Hieroglyphs, laid the systematic groundwork for future scholars to finally decipher the Maya language. He meticulously documented the long count, the complex Maya calendar that marks its starting date in the year 3114 BCE, long before the pyramids of Giza were built. This discovery alone proved the incredible time depth of Maya civilization, shattering the Spanish-era belief that they were a people without a meaningful history. In the final analysis, Morley's legacy wasn't just in the city he unearthed, but in the world he revealed. He showed that the Maya were a dynamic, often warring collection of kingdoms, with a culture as deep, complex, and monumental as any in the ancient world. But Chichen Itza was just one city. Other American teams, working with a different philosophy, were making discoveries that would further expand this new vision of the Maya, uncovering the intimate stories of the kings who ruled these jungle kingdoms. The secrets of an entire royal dynasty lay carved in stone. Copán's royal secret. While Sylvanus Morley was making headlines with his grand-scale excavations at Chichen Itza, another powerhouse of American academia was mounting its own expeditions farther south, in the dense, fertile river valleys of Honduras. Harvard University's Peabody Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology, one of the oldest anthropological museums in the world, had its sights set on Copán, a city renowned for its breathtakingly intricate art. The man leading the charge was Alfred Tauser, a scholar whose meticulous, almost clinical approach to fieldwork was the perfect counterbalance to Morley's flamboyant style. If Morley was the showman, Tauser was the quiet scientist, more interested in cultural patterns than public acclaim. Copán was different from the sprawling, somewhat austere cities of the Yucatan. It was a compact jewel box of a city, an artistic and intellectual center that flourished for nearly 400 years, from the 5th to the 9th century CE. Often called the Athens of the Maya world, its artists achieved a level of realism and three-dimensional depth in their stone carvings that was unmatched anywhere else in the Americas. When Tauser and the Harvard teams arrived in the early 1900s, they were confronted with a city of ghosts, where magnificent stone monuments called stelae stood like silent sentinels in the Great Plaza. These weren't just abstract statues. They were stunningly detailed portraits of Copán's powerful rulers, men who styled themselves as holy jaguar lords and claimed descent from the gods. Each stela was covered from top to bottom in hieroglyphs, a silent history waiting to be read. The team's most significant and challenging focus became a structure that would come to be known as one of the wonders of the ancient Americas, the hieroglyphic stairway of Structure 26. This wasn't just a staircase. It was the longest known continuous text of the ancient Maya world. 62 monumental steps, each about 30 feet wide, led up the side of a pyramid. The face of each and every riser was carved with some of the 2,200 individual glyphs that made up this incredible historical inscription. The human element of this discovery deserves emphasis. When archaeologists found it, the stairway had partially collapsed, and the blocks of the central portion lay in a jumbled heap at the base. Reconstructing it became one of the greatest and most frustrating jigsaw puzzles in archaeological history. For decades, the story it told remained fragmented, a whisper from the past. The painstaking work of documenting the stairway was a monumental achievement. Archaeologists carefully cleaned each glyph, made plaster casts, and took thousands of photographs, preserving the text before it could degrade further in the tropical climate. It would take decades, but scholars who built on the work of Morley and Tauser, particularly the brilliant Russian-American architect turned epigrapher Tatyana Proskuryakov, finally began to make sense of the inscription. Proskuryakov's breakthrough in the 1960s was the realization that the glyphs recorded not just mythology and calendars, but the actual histories of human rulers. Applying this new understanding, the hieroglyphic stairway was revealed to be a dynastic chronicle, the detailed history of Copán's powerful royal line, starting with its founder, Kainich Yaks Kuk Mo, who came to power in 426 CE. It was like finding a stone version of the Old Testament, a detailed record of births, accessions to the throne, wars, and rituals. The stairway told the story of a powerful dynasty that ruled for centuries, a lineage as detailed as that of any Egyptian pharaoh. More troubling to the old Spanish narrative were the other discoveries at Copán. The Harvard team excavated intricate tombs deep within the city's Acropolis, a massive raised complex of pyramids and palaces. They found the Margarita tomb, the resting place of a revered royal woman, filled with thousands of jade beads and pottery painted with stunningly complex scenes. They also uncovered Altar Q, a square stone block that has become Copán's own Rosetta Stone. Carved around its four sides are the portraits of all 16 kings of the dynasty, sitting in a row and passing a scepter of power from the founder to the last ruler. This single artifact, cross-referenced with the stelae and the stairway, provided the key to unlocking the identity of the figures, giving names and life stories to the silent stone faces in the plaza. Tauser's work also had a unique ethnographic component. He spent considerable time living with the Lacandon Maya in Chiapas, Mexico, documenting their modern-day customs and beliefs. He believed that understanding the present was a key to unlocking the past, a revolutionary idea at the time. This approach allowed him to see the ruins not as a dead city, but as a living cultural landscape. His studies on animal figures in the Maya codices helped decode symbols in the carvings, linking the jaguar to royalty and the serpent to the heavens. He saw the threads of ancient traditions still woven into the fabric of modern Maya life, proving Stephens's controversial theory right once and for all. The combined work of the Carnegie and Harvard expeditions was painting a picture of a civilization of shocking complexity. These weren't isolated city-states. They were part of a vast interconnected world. The Maya world was emerging from the shadows as a civilization that could stand shoulder to shoulder with any in the ancient world. And yet, the true scale of their domain was still not fully understood. New discoveries were about to reveal just how massive their world truly was. The jungle still held its biggest secret: entire cities lost to time, mapping a lost civilization. The story of the American expeditions is not just about two superstar archaeologists or two famous sites. It was a tidal wave of discovery that swept across Central America. Following the lead of Carnegie and Harvard, other institutions like Tulane University's Middle American Research Institute, MARI, and the University of Pennsylvania launched their own probes into the green expanse of Mesoamerica. What they collectively revealed was the true, mind-boggling scale of the Maya world, forcing a complete recalibration of ancient history. For the first time, the comparison to Egypt wasn't just a dramatic flourish. It was becoming a plain, undeniable statement of fact, supported by an avalanche of data. Let's talk numbers, because the data that emerged from these decades of research is simply stunning. At its peak during the Classic period, around 800 CE, the Maya population is estimated to have been as high as 10 million people, a population density in its core regions rivaling that of parts of Europe or China at the time. This massive population was sustained by some of the most sophisticated and intensive agricultural systems in the ancient world, including vast networks of raised fields and canals in the swampy lowlands and intricate terracing on the hillsides. They inhabited a territory of over 125,000 square miles, an area larger than Italy, stretching from southern Mexico down through Guatemala, Belize, and the western parts of Honduras and El Salvador. This wasn't a handful of towns. It was a civilization commanding a vast and diverse swath of the continent. The urban planning itself was a marvel. Expeditions uncovered dozens of major cities, each a powerful kingdom in its own right. At Palenque, in the foothills of Chiapas, they found graceful palaces with intricate stucco reliefs, and most famously, the tomb of the great king Kiinich Janab Pakal, discovered deep within the Temple of the Inscriptions in 1952. This discovery was the New World's equivalent of finding Tutankhamun's tomb, a powerful king resting in a sarcophagus covered in cosmic imagery. At Tikal, in the heart of the Guatemalan jungle, University of Pennsylvania archaeologists mapped a metropolis whose central pyramids soared over 130 feet above the jungle floor. For centuries, these were the tallest man-made structures in the Americas. These cities were connected by the Sakbiab, or whiteways. These were raised limestone causeways, paved with white stucco that would have shimmered in the moonlight. They were built straight as an arrow, cutting through dense jungle and swamp, some stretching for over 60 miles. The logistics of building and maintaining this infrastructure without draft animals, the wheel, or metal tools speak to a level of social organization and political power that Spanish scholars had never dreamed of. But the Mayas' most profound achievements may have been intellectual, in the silent realms of mathematics and astronomy. In the final analysis, their contributions here were centuries ahead of their Old World counterparts. While Europe was still fumbling with the cumbersome Roman numeral system, the Maya had independently developed the concept of zero, a revolutionary mathematical idea that is the bedrock of all modern arithmetic. They used a base 20, or vigesimal, counting system that allowed them to make calculations on a massive scale, tracking vast cycles of time with breathtaking precision. This mathematical prowess was directly applied to their obsessive study of the cosmos. From observatories like the Caracol at Chichen Itza, a domed structure with windows precisely aligned to track the movements of Venus, Maya astronomers created tables of celestial events. Their calculation for the length of a solar year was 365.2420 days, astonishingly close to the true figure of 365.2422. It was more precise than the Julian calendar used in Europe at the time. They could predict solar and lunar eclipses, and they charted the 584-day cycle of Venus, a planet they associated with war and fate, with an error of just 2 hours over a period of 500 years. This knowledge wasn't just academic. It was the foundation of their religion, their agriculture, and their statecraft. Kings timed their coronations and their wars based on the position of the stars. It was a society governed by the clockwork of the heavens. The legacy of these early American expeditions is still being felt today, amplified by technology they could have never imagined. In recent years, a technology called LiDAR, light detection and ranging, which uses laser pulses from an aircraft to map the ground, has digitally peeled back the jungle canopy. The results have been a revelation beyond anything Morley or Tozzer could have conceived. These surveys have uncovered thousands of previously unknown structures, extensive defensive fortifications, industrial-scale irrigation canals, and vast tracts of interconnected farm fields. It reveals that the Maya heartland was not a pristine jungle with a few cities in it, but a completely engineered landscape, a garden city on a continental scale. We are now finding that these lost cities weren't lost at all. They were part of a densely populated, interconnected kingdom of millions. The impossible was becoming routine. American archaeologists had not just found a new civilization, they had found one of the world's great classical civilizations, a true peer to those of Mesopotamia, China, and, yes, Egypt. But a question lingered, a question that still haunts us. If they were so powerful, so organized, so brilliant, where did they go? Our turn to wonder. The discoveries made by Morley, Tozzer, and their contemporaries did more than just put a new civilization on the map. They completely overturned 400 years of colonial assumptions and forced the world to see the Americas in a new, more complex light. The textbooks were literally rewritten. The narrative of a new world, devoid of ancient glory, a blank slate upon which European history was to be written, was replaced by the story of the Maya, a civilization whose intellectual and artistic achievements were second to none. The idea that Spanish scholars never expected this outcome is an understatement. The findings fundamentally challenged the Eurocentric view of history itself, proving that genius and complexity could arise anywhere on the globe. Yet these discoveries also gave rise to the single greatest mystery in American archaeology, the so-called classic Maya collapse. The evidence for it is stark and undeniable. Between about 800 and 950 CE, the civilization in the southern lowlands, the region of great cities like Tikal, Palenque, and Copán, experienced a dramatic and terminal decline. The construction of magnificent temples and palaces ceased. The carving of stelae with long count calendar dates, the very heartbeat of their historical record, stopped abruptly. The great cities, once home to tens of thousands, were gradually abandoned to the jungle. For decades, this has been framed as a great vanishing act, a puzzle that has invited all sorts of speculative and often outlandish theories, from alien abduction to mysterious plagues to mass spiritual transcendence. But as we look closer, talking directly to the archaeologists, climatologists, and epigraphers who study this period, the reality is far more complex and, in many ways, far more relevant to our own world. The thing is, this wasn't an overnight event like the eruption of Vesuvius. It wasn't a single catastrophe, but a cascade of failures, a perfect storm of pressures that played out over several generations. The emerging consensus points to a fatal combination of factors. First, severe and prolonged droughts, recorded in the sediment layers of lake beds and cave stalagmites, crippled their agricultural system, which was heavily dependent on consistent rainfall. Second, centuries of intensive farming to support a massive population led to widespread deforestation and soil erosion, exacerbating the effects of the drought. This environmental stress, in turn, fueled the third factor, endemic warfare. As resources like water and fertile land grew scarce, competition between the city-states intensified. We see the evidence in the archaeological record. Late Classic period cities began building massive defensive walls and fortifications, something unseen in earlier, more prosperous times. Glyphic texts from this era speak of escalating conflicts, of kings captured and sacrificed, This constant state of war further disrupted trade routes and agricultural production, creating a vicious feedback loop. The complex political and economic system that had sustained millions, a system based on the divine authority of kings who were supposed to guarantee prosperity, simply broke under the strain. The people lost faith in their rulers, and the social contract dissolved. So, did the Maya disappear? Number. This is perhaps the greatest and most persistent myth of all. While the southern cities declined and were reclaimed by the jungle, Maya civilization continued to flourish for centuries more in the northern Yucatan, at cities like Chichen Itza and later Mayapan. And more importantly, the Maya people never went anywhere. Today, more than 7 million Maya people live in their ancestral homelands in Mexico and Central America, speaking their native languages and maintaining many of their unique traditions. They are the direct descendants of the pyramid builders and stargazers. The collapse was not of a people, but of a specific political and social system in one part of their world. In the final analysis, the legacy of the American archaeologists of the early 20th century is twofold. They unearthed the physical remains of a magnificent civilization, revealing its power and sophistication to a skeptical world. But they also laid the groundwork for a deeper, more nuanced understanding of who the Maya were and who they are today. The story is no longer about a lost race, a mystery to be explained away with fanciful theories. It is the story of the resilience of a people and a powerful lesson about the complex forces, environmental, political, and social, that shape the rise and fall of all great civilizations. Are we missing a key detail that could unlock the final secrets of their decline? Perhaps. The jungle still holds countless ruins, and modern technology like LIDAR promises a new golden age of discovery. The great stone cities may have fallen silent, but their story, a story that began with a lie and was redeemed by science, is far from over. The Maya built an empire that rivaled the pharaohs, only to see its political heartland crumble under the pressures of climate change and constant warfare. Was their downfall a warning written in stone for our own time? Let us know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more journeys into the lost worlds of history.